I'm Lindsey Vardi with Gravity University, and we are here again today with Randy Veitenheimer. Hi, Randy. Thank you for coming.
Hi, Lindsay.
And today's book is going to be The Foundation book by Isaac Asimov.
Yes, there.
And we're going to ask Randy a few questions that everybody's gotten to us. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Can you give us a brief summary of what you thought about The Foundation?
This is a crazy book. Okay, it's it truly is a foundation because it's like a university of subjects, and the way that they're delivered in fiction is amazing because it's apparently has served as a template for kind of where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the book has been incredible. I've probably read it 20 or 30 times. And of course, each time you read it, you come up with a different takeaway because you've changed.
Mm-hmm.
You've gathered additional knowledge or experience in the world that makes the information relevant. So, so yeah, it's a tremendous book. I think it's you could have the Foundation University, and and the idea behind it is that you would pull the subjects or the curriculum out of here. Everything from nuclear physics to psychology, psychiatry, everything is involved in this book. And it was written in 1942.
Yeah, wow.
That's the craziness of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
There are several books in the Foundation series. How come we started off with the Foundation and not the prelude to the Foundation?
prequels are kind of a funny thing. It's if you're writing, it's an attempt to kind of correct a few errors or develop what they call character development. So, you think about, well, you meet somebody and say hello. Well, okay, how are you and what you up to and blah, blah. And invariably you go into prelude. You go into, well, where were you before I met you? And and that gets into an interesting idea about kind of like where we are now and the fascination with the past. Because fascination with the past means to take your time and instead of looking at it as something to be utilized as a tool for the future, you become backwards looking, is what I call it. So,
Harry Seldon is an interesting figure. How do you think one man could calculate and predict the events that were to occur?
it'd be easy to say I don't know, but one of the things that occurs is like when you're looking at something like AI, artificial intelligence, and you say, well, they have access to information and they can parse that information faster than we can. But one of the things about AI is that it doesn't include the ability to access the field, the entire field of knowledge that exists. So one of the things that happened in the movie Contact
Mm-hmm.
is you have this satellite going out there broadcasting information, which we do, and all of a sudden it picks up something that happened 50 years ago, let's say. So information, once it's generated, it becomes more or less permanent. It certainly becomes accessible. And so one of the things that happened here is that I believe he had access, what I call, to the field.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he was able to tap into human conscious, human memory, and even more to develop it into a theme that addresses the future, because our future is all through this book.
Uh-huh.
It's like crazy how much of it applies to modern day. So
Is mathematics really that strong and precise? I know it's a probability, but a 98% chance is a strong probability.
yeah, he uses probability theory as part of quantum mechanics, and It's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can be 99% sure of something, but not 100%. And it deals with the problem of location and velocity. And and some of those things have uh, a high degree of application in what we do. But instead of using words, they use numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a theory that says that the primary way to lie is with numbers. So, 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 so probability theory gives you the ability to examine a future event that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many variables that it becomes polluted. That'd be a
Okay.
good word. And it becomes polluted with your own desires and your own inputs and your own consciousness. So one of the things in this book is the idea of a prime radiant. And he talks about it. And of course, this is where I interject that I don't believe in the death penalty, but the people who did the show, Foundation on TV, definitely should be subjected to an intense look because they just like massacred this book.
Ugh.
And that's a whole nother subject. We could do a film review. But the prime radiant is actually an incredible concept. I picked this up when I was like 18.
Wow.
And I read it, and it's like, it made sense to me that you would have a projected path. Now, later we come to today, and I've developed up a lot of information where I call it a timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can be on a timeline, and then we are resistant to any changes to that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And he develops that theory real well because it's not just a timeline for an individual, and he delineates that in here, but it's more a timeline for a society or a consciousness or even a species, we could say.
Wow. Okay.
So, and that would be something that would take a long time to explore because I've been exploring timelines or radiant paths, is the way he calls it, for about 50 years. So there's a lot of information there.
Yeah.
Right.
Harry seldom touches on good points. He noted that when scientists and scholars dominate, people eventually lose out without such technical skills as operating power plants. Do you see this as a real-time problem?
Oh, it's going on right now.
It is.
It's the emphasis on let's see, what would be the right word? Thought absorption.
Mm-hmm.
So thought absorption precludes action.
Okay.
As long as you're involved in your thoughts, you're not doing anything. And we have become a society totally devolved into thought absorption. The TV, the
Mm-hmm.
videos, YouTube, Facebook, all of it's like, all you do is sit there and your thoughts run around rampant. And nothing ever happens except your waist tends to grow a little bit and a few other things. But it's a problem. So one of the things we note is a deterioration in skill levels.
Mm-hmm.
An example would be like NASA when they built the Saturn V rocket. The people that built that are all gone. The people capable of building it are all gone. The techniques and imagination and engineering is basically non-interesting. So we're seeing this devolution occur in our society that nobody talks about. There's nobody to build trains anymore. There's nobody to engineer things that that would be important to our society.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're no longer interesting. I have some incredible skill sets that I spent years to develop. They're not in demand,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we see the passing of that and everything going into computers and thought, and again, it still requires an action.
Yeah.
And without that actions behind it and skill sets, you'll continue to see a devolution in people. Think about the number of people that could construct a highway. Think about the number of people that want to construct a highway. It's like they just don't even want to do it anymore, let alone the skill sets behind it. And And that's what I found with some skill sets I have is that nobody wants to learn them anymore. Nobody comes to you and say, hey, teach me to be a carpenter, or teach me to be an engineer, or teach me to be a scientist or anything. Uh, and I say that because it tends to be localized.
Hmm.
Uh, Places like China are placing a heavy emphasis on engineering and science and math. And other parts of the world has kind of lost its cachet. So,
Do you think we will at some point have our own galactic empire?
no.
Never?
No.
We're not
The,
getting going that way?
um, there's some other science fiction books that allude to the fact that any diaspora would be small.
Okay.
Yeah, even like dear Elon. Oh, we're going to colonize Mars. We're going to send 6 people. So, so if you take a population of 6 people, without going back to Adam and Eve, um, how long does that take, right?
Yeah.
So, so the infinity of that implies certain assumptions that you have a technological base and resource base able to support that kind of long-term efforts. And we saw that in our moon program. It's like a new president comes in and immediately that's just shut down. There's no more resources. And then it gets picked up again. We're going back to the moon. Then it gets shut down. It's like there's no continuity in any of it.
Hmm.
So to have continuity of effort requires what I call single purpose. And out of that comes a united purpose. And I don't think you find a united purpose particularly anywhere on this planet at this time or for the foreseeable future. So, my opinion.
Selden uses the encyclopedia as an excuse to establish a new planet and second planet. How was he able to get an entire population to believe everything he was putting forth without questioning it?
Programming. It's we underestimate the effect that programming has on us at an early age. The Jesuits didn't. they, they said, give me a child till 6 years old and I'll give you the man later. And so we fail to understand our programming from several different uh, points of view. So we can view things from a psychological impact or from a spiritual, from a sociological. All these are formative structures. And most of them are in contretemps. They're in opposition. There's no synchronization behind them. But if you can isolate people into a single paradigm, then you can basically limit their ability to go beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
And and what I call that is a failure of imagination. You place restrictions on imagination, and uh, and in this case, I think the character is presented, Selden, had no restrictions on his imagination, and I think that's important because I think that's exactly the same thing going on with Asimov. There were
Aha.
no restrictions on his imagination,
Okay.
and he had access to the field.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess the bigger question is, how could Selden formulate the questions needed to make such assumptions that the Galactic Empire would fall?
Remember that prime radiant,
Hmm.
and the the answer is real simple. It's collective inertia.
Okay.
So so this gets into the idea of a prime radiant. You have an inertia that has been built up by all your programming, all the information and experience you have, what we call to move.
Hmm.
But what Asimov lays out in this, which is the current uh, field manual by the CIA and everybody else, is the idea that you can manipulate that you can cause that inertia to be diverted in certain directions. And that's where psychology became applied psychology, and we call it politics. It's where sociology became social engineering. And anybody that says they're educated today that doesn't understand psychological and sociological inputs and programs and how they modify how we think and how we move to the future is woefully uneducated, in my opinion.
Religion is what brings the foundation together and staves them off of domination in the beginning. Do you think that was intentional by Harry Seldon and his mathematics?
Religion holds a base level consciousness proclivity. In other words, we're susceptible to religion. We're susceptible to spirituality. These are different parts of the human consciousness. We're susceptible to the intellect, and we call that science. And so that susceptibility or proclivity means that we have kind of a built-in interest, a built-in, here we go again, curiosity, a built-in kind of like a trigger that causes us to go, what? What? Tell me more, tell me more. And then what we're trying to do is find some substantive framework that we can kind of hold our life or express our life. Hold our life in a framework of boundaries and limits and ideals and laws. And remember, Asimov had unlimited imagination, so he could go beyond whatever they were. But the idea of binding people in religion, we only have to look in the world today. Bind them in politics, psychology. Bind them in sociological, that's culture. And all these things have become instruments of, I call them instruments of betrayal, because they've been used in a way that produces a negative outcome. They've been used in a way to produce a modified prime radiant of how we move forward. And so in some ways, I think our culture, our society has been diverted from its advancement. And the key element of this book is that it's one of advancement. It's one of a continual growth and advancement to oppose the continual entropy that goes on when systems fail, nations fail, cultures fail. So I think it's very important that people think about things like this.
Yes. So do you think Harry Seldon was a religious man
No.
at all?
No, I think it's called a singular point of view. We exist in a multi-universe, we'll say that word. Multiverse, I think, is a popular term right now. And a singular viewpoint becomes almost impossible to hold on to, because it eliminates the ability to explore other areas. It's kind of like saying I have the answer and I don't need any other answers. And of course we see that a lot in politics and people that hold on to a strict point of view. So it's my religion, my politics, my political party, my this, my that, my. And the effect of that, like I said, is to eliminate the ability to imagine, the ability to know an answer that is not included in your information set. And that's what I call it. You have an information set, and once it's closed, a closed set, then additional information is not needed or wanted. I think we call those Karens today or something. So.
How does nuclear power fit into this whole story?
Oh my. This book was written it's published in 1942. So think about it. The nuclear bomb hadn't supposedly been invented at that time.
Yeah.
And so to go from nuclear bombs to nuclear power plants is like, well, that hadn't been invented.
Mm-hmm.
And then and the reason I know this, I studied nuclear engineering and I studied nuclear physics, basically starting when I was 8 years old. It's a long story, but I got off into it and fascinated by it. And one of the things that happened in the mid 60s is that the idea of making nuclear power bigger. And the phenomenon in this book is that they made it smaller. They made it accessible. And that area is called nucleonics. It's miniaturization. So one of the things about scientific endeavor is they keep trying to find smaller and smaller ways of doing things. Whether it's CERN or whether it's transistors that went from size of a book all the way down to nanoscale now. So nucleonics got disappeared. It got ghosted out of the lexicon and the information set. And the reason I know this is because it just totally disappeared. There's no other way to do nuclear fission or fusion except with like what we call high elements. But then, well, you can use thorium. You know, there's other ways you can generate nuclear power. And the idea, just like with the batteries, like in cars, Elon Musk's cars, Tesla, is that a small nuclear battery, you could power that thing forever. And it's no more dangerous than sitting in the cars today with their high magnetic fields. They don't tell you about that. So nucleonics becomes a big thing.
Uh-huh.
It's like we should have a small nuclear battery that could power all the lights in the house or whatever, literally almost forever. And I mean, I've examined it and I'm not in the field right now, but it's entirely plausible and possible to develop that up. And that becomes a central theme in this because I keep going back to Elon, I'll tell you why later, but you know, one of the things they look at is what we call a nuclear powered rocket ship. Well, that stuff was played with in the 60s when I was looking at it when I was 12, 14 years old. So that's not new. What's new is 50 years of non-talk about it, non-exploration, non-presentation, non-development, and non-interest. And that's a construct. It's like, how come nobody talks about it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you try to develop it up as a topic, nobody wants to talk about it, which to me means we should talk about it. So,
Did you notice the religion versus science argument in this book?
oh yeah. Uh, the problem is it's not religion versus science, it's religion versus religion.
Oh.
And one of the things that happen in we have what we call mystery schools. And mystery schools deal with esoteric, we call it esoteric, exoteric language. Exoteric being physical, esoteric being non-physical information flows. And and that again is literally just access to the field. All mystery schools was just they had access to the field for information that's not available through the intellect. So religion, let's see if I can get this right, is I'll call it a subconscious interest, and science is a interest of the consciousness, of the intellect in particular. So the intellect has no place in religion, and religion has no place in science. And invariably, they try to put them in the same category, same thing. I used to go to a lot of what they call science and consciousness
Mm-hmm.
events around the country last 30 years. And they don't go together. It's science and religion, science and spirituality, that was another big one. They don't go together. It's like spirituality and spirituality. And it's just that you have a different God under each one. You have a different deity, okay,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
right? And then they use history to promote it, like in religion. And in science, we use math and numbers. And to me, the easiest way to lie is with numbers, my opinion.
Okay.
And the second easiest way to lie is with history. And I think that Asimov deals with both those subjects in here in an extremely, extremely interesting way. So
Can you explain what you mean by the field? Because you've mentioned that several times.
it's back to that concept in contact. All electromagnetic events theoretically propagate throughout time and space.
Okay.
And that would be about 3 hours of talk to explain all that. Uh, because classic questions occur about what's the means of propagation, what's the means of storage, what's the means of availability, where are they located, when are they located, and how do you find all that? And the answer is you can't find it by saying all those things I just said. It goes into an area of knowingness, and knowingness is strictly the province of the mystery schools that occurred up to the 1880s, 1890s, and then they got disappeared. But one of the things that happened in the mystery schools is they started Rosicrucians, I'm talking about Blavatsky, all these people. Um, One of the things that happened is that they knew that science would become the new religion,
Okay.
and materialism was
Uh-huh.
what's called. So science is very much concerned with the material and breaking it down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's CERN and all the other things we have. But spirituality is going the other direction. It's not, it's going for the macrocosm as opposed to the microcosm.
Mm-hmm.
So so there becomes the differentiation, and spirituality kind of got eliminated out of the lexicon and consciousness in the 1900s. It made a roaring comeback in the roaring 20s, and then it disappeared again. And now you see it, but only you don't see it in mainstream. You see it as something having people having a desire to explore that which they feel is there, but they don't know what it is or have access to it. And so now we see the proliferation of like yoga, meditation, and things. All those do is result in a higher access to the information field. And just like in the movie Contact, where they retrieved that information and sent it back to us, it's because that information was streaming out into the universe, out into the field. And that's what we call all information, all energies in the field. And then, as a side note, the idea of faster than light travel, which is part of this book, is the idea you would travel between things,
Okay.
right? Whether it's between moments or between things, but the idea too is that is not explored real well, is that all the energy you need is between things. It's it's an interesting concept in physics that the amount of energy between the electrons and the nucleus, there's more energy there than is in the energy of splitting that atom up and making nuclear energy. So there are additional sources of energy out there that, again, they don't get talked about, they don't get explored in reality, I call it. But it doesn't mean that they haven't been examined,
Mm-hmm.
because what he's done here is lay out literally everything that's going on in our world today has been laid out in this book.
In
So,
1942.
and well, I think he had to come up with it before then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it takes me a long time to write a book. So then the question is, well, how did he know there'd be nuclear power plants? How did he know there'd be nucleonics?
Mm-hmm.
And so you see the culmination of what's going on in this book occurring in real time. And that to me makes it like the universe of foundation. Okay. We'll get to that. Right. So
So, what is the field in one sentence?
it's the aggregate of all information, consciousness, and energy in the universe.
Okay.
Nobody's ever said that. There, I said it.
Do you think we will be able to make the jump to living on other planets, or will we destroy ourselves before we get the chance? Much.
Yes. It's a, um, what does a hostile environment teach you? It teaches you to be resourceful. It teaches you to be imaginative.
Mm-hmm.
We call it marriage at a domestic level. And and so the idea of why go to a hostile planet? Why place yourself in such a detrimental environment?
Mm-hmm.
And uh, either we have a death wish, which to go and subject ourselves to that, or actually to place ourselves in those environments to see what we can learn,
Okay.
right? So there may be some benefit, there may be some knowledge come out of that, and then it becomes just strictly an equation of how much does it cost and what's the benefit, cost-benefit analysis.
So how do we stop the cycle of war?
Okay, so one of the kind of maxims used is war is only useful if there's money at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And people want to so much say, well, let's go to war because. There's no because. There's only what I call the will to action,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is using the past. Remember, religion uses the past. Well, somebody did something to me, so I'm going to go to war. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Science uses the other side. Something's going to happen. So, like in present day wars around the world, you see both of them as operative, and both of them result in war,
Mm-hmm.
and both of them result in there has to be a profit at the end of it. And so, if you say you eliminated war on this planet, you would say there would be no more profit in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not. You look at how much we spend, trillions of dollars. Think about if you just spent that on
Yeah.
style of living,
Mm-hmm.
even for one country, let alone the entire world. What if everybody just stopped? My theory was everybody take a break from war, no new wars. And of course, how are you going to enforce that with war? Uh, so it becomes a loop, right? A looping consciousness. Um, and that's the idea of the UN. It's like, well, we're going to put an end to all war. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have our own military, and we'll force you by war to not do war. So, and you can run through that convolution, enemy how many times, it still ends up in the same thing. There has to be a profit involved.
Yeah.
The only way war can occur is through obedience to an appointed authority.
Okay.
So, if we look at like the EU,
Mm-hmm.
those are appointed authorities. None of those people were elected. Here we have elected people,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still an appointed authority.
Okay.
We are appointing that authority
Yeah.
to what? Have authority over us. Here we go with the convolutions. My favorite one is I got to get drunk and it's all your fault, right? That's a convolution of logic. And one of the things that goes on is that it's not just a study of science and religion. You need to study symbolic logic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like until you can break down what people are saying and what's underneath it and what's the outcome of it, you have no clue where this train is going. Remember that radiant path that he talks about. It's like, and remember that radiant path has inertia. It has momentum. So our pathway forward, when you say we're going to take war out of that equation, out of that pathway, it's like nobody knows what that looks like, because in the history of this planet, I think there's only been a few hundred years where there was never any war going on the
Yeah.
planet. It's kind of like we like it, we love it, we want some more of it. I think there was a song like that. So anyway, in one of these songs it says war, what is it good for? And then it says absolutely nothing. And that's not true, because war is something, remember there's money at the end. There's an appointed authority that apparently gains some sort of like, God did good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we see. At the end of every war, we have all these people congratulating each other on, golly, I did good, I won, I won. What did you win? The idea of an appointed authority, you have to have blind obedience to an appointed authority. We call those political parties. We call them religions. Everybody picks their appointed authority. Um, and that's an ingrainment that occurs through sociological, through environmental, through parental, through education. Every situation you go into has an appointed authority.
Mm-hmm.
It's the teacher, it's the boss, it's the wife, it's the husband. It's built ingrained into our society. And until we address the point that an appointed authority should have a limited range of things that they can address.
Okay.
And again, it's like going into a religion, science being one of them. It's like you put brackets on your information set. You're saying no other authority exists. My authority is the president. It's not Putin. You see what I mean? It's you can do that all the way through college football. My authority is my coach, not your coach. So until you take that out or examine it in human consciousness and come up with answers for it, then it's not going to change. You're not going to get a worldwide
Mm-hmm.
appointed authority, no matter how much, like what we see in different organizations today. Um, because every time you try to control the world, it's too much. It's like a spiritual naivety to think that you can control every person on the planet. It doesn't keep certain people from trying.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I like a Native American saying I came up with when I was younger. People would say, "How you doing?" And I'd go, "I think I've got them surrounded." so, so strictly ego standpoint, people that think that they can rule the world or control the world is one of the highest forms of insanity to me. And and I think that Asimov in this book points that out.
Mm-hmm.
All the way through, he represents how small the imagination is of the people that he runs into that are the opposition, we'll call
That is interesting.
it. Yeah, yeah. So,
What do you think is going to come up in this second Foundation book?
huh. There's about a dozen of them now. And like in Prelude to Foundation is character development,
Okay.
like background. We're putting clothes on everything. Uh, it's kind of like, "Hi, Lindsay, where are you from?" Right? "What do you do? Where are you from?" Remember these questions. And so, in the second and third book, all you got to do is take just one area. Take spirituality, take intellect, take science, take exploration. Each of those can become a subject, and that's what I love about this book. It's what I call open-ended,
Mm-hmm.
because you can follow it to the degree of to the degree of available information, or current state of affairs would be a better language.
Okay.
And so, of course, our current state of affairs keeps changing. So, so foundation, second foundation, they're phenomenal because, again, he's running this imagination out through the scenarios. And one of the things people don't understand about, I think, about Asimov's book is that the idea of a prime radiant and the equations to arrive at that is very simple, is to consider potential in each scenario.
Okay.
And we do that, kind of like go to a horse track and bet on the races. What's the potential of this one versus that one? That's all we're doing. But if you can throw enough of those questions at, you're going to isolate reality down into a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, how many you have to throw at it may be in the millions. And of course, that's where AI comes in, is that they can throw scenarios, let's say, to examine for potential. And one of the things about AI is that they only produce maybe 65% accurate, 65 to 85, I think. And they do the same thing. They run the same scenario millions of times. And at the end of it, rather than come up with an answer, they come up with a probability.
Okay.
And I think that's something that people don't understand about AI. Okay. So he is predicting that. And he's doing it through some mechanism that ultimately has to be some form of AI.
Hmm.
1942, keep it in mind. So
Wow. What do you know about Isaac Asimov? Who was he, and why do you think he wrote this series?
I think that, not think, from what research I've done, he was what's called an initiate into the mystery schools, what do you want to call it, secret history, secret science. I mean, there's so many books and stories and films out right now. Uh, because if you look at what he's written, he was writing a prelude to history and literally providing that prelude in the same way we'd give an outline. And so then we go, well, what kind of mind would be able to do that? And well, his IQ was probably in the 150s. Well, that's pretty high. Because to be able to entertain these concepts and run the science of it requires that kind of IQ.
Hmm.
And that's one of the failings in our society, I feel, is that we don't integrate the concept of IQ into education.
Okay.
It's like we don't say, well, if you have a certain IQ level, you could study science. But really, we should,
Hmm.
because otherwise it becomes unfathomable. Well, it requires a certain disposition to study religion, not necessarily an IQ. They're different. There's all these things. And he's laying all that out. So, number one, he had a high IQ. Number two, he had access to information. So now we go backwards. Like I said, mystery schools have been eliminated from our conscious as a place of study or learning or information. And of course, there's all sorts of unanswerable questions about our past. But what he did is stop going to the past and turn around all that towards the future. And we don't do that. That's that thought absorption with. You can find Game of Thrones, you can find all kinds of stories and books, and they're all about something that happened in the past.
Okay.
And as soon as you go into the future, it skips over to the intellect and science. Well, humanity is not exactly a science of how, it's not exactly a science about how we have progressed in our consciousness, in our existence in this world. Um, because it has not been progressive, we would say. It's kind of like you take a step forward and 10 steps back. So those things come into play. And then the last one is, what the hell kind of environment did he have where he could get this information and put it down and do so? Like a lot of this should be restricted information. It's like, this book produced social engineering. It produced politics as a science of psychology. And it keeps just going on forever if you work your way through the book. And I mean, I've got 100 pages that are turned down and notes in the side of it. And again, that's from 1967, I think, is when I read it. And it had already been out for 15 years.
Hmm.
And after all that, you have to think of, is this a blueprint? Did in 1930 something, before there was ever wars or anything, Second World War, did Asimov sit down and come up with a blueprint that people are following to this day? And if you look at the prime radian again, that becomes entirely possible and probable. And we're back to that again. And of course, now who's following the blueprint? Because he has definitely laid out a blueprint of progression
Hmm.
of our society, of our consciousness, of our scientific development, and everything. And he leaves open the religious spiritual end of it. He does address it in future books, but anyway.
So you said he was an initiate of the mystery schools, and you've mentioned mystery schools several times. What
Mhm.
exactly is the mystery school? Is it hidden from the public eye?
Yeah, you have Rosicrucians, you have the secret societies within the Catholic Church,
Okay.
you have the Talmud scholars in Jewish. It's like for some reason, religion up until, let's say, the 1900s was the repository for any kind of imaginative advancement in consciousness or knowledge.
Okay.
The one most people know is the Masons and the Masonic lodges.
Okay.
Those are mystery
Okay.
schools. But there was Steiner and Blavatsky, and this was something that's pretty interesting. I was studying nuclear physics, but at the same time, by the time I was 16, I was studying the mystery schools. And of course, that meant reading hundreds and hundreds of books and trying to figure some of this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
Not all knowledge is available
Mm-hmm.
or presented in our mainstream colleges and forms of education.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to educate yourself in this, there's no school you can go to. Gravity University. Maybe we can start giving things for people. But you had to be a member of some society, some secret lodge like at Yale or, I mean, they run throughout our history. The number of Masons that were presidents, the number of people that were in Skull and Bones. That's a mystery school. And so they're rampant, and yet at the same time they're isolated and they're restrictive and not available to common knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's so much information in history and knowledge about some of the things that Asimov was talking about that are buried in those societies, and that's the reason I talk about them.
Okay.
So they're repositories of knowledge not normally available or known to the rest of humanity. There.
How do you think Isaac Asimov was able to look so far into the future to write such a story and to predict such events?
That fascinates me. I don't know. I've been buried so much in trying to come up with how to employ what I've learned in this book. And I think I'm not the only one. Like I said, I think there are people following this as a blueprint. And so even prime radiance, when I work on people, that's what I'm running. I'm running that prime radiant, that prime pathway through the universe of that individual. And the idea is to find those things that are interfering and keeping them from being able to progress themselves. I think the idea, like Harry Seldon, is doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
When he reappears, it's to apply another force to control the direction of movement. And that goes on in our life every day and constantly. It's, again, not something people talk about, like how's that work? Where's it come from? How do I modify it? How do I not be influenced by all these negative interactions or things that keep me from being able to follow my own path? And that's the language we have, and it's an appropriate language.
Okay.
But then that's for an individual, and that's very hard and he says it in the book, it's very hard to predict for an individual. But if you take the collective inertia of a society or humanity, it's very easily predictable, even today. So,
was Isaac Asimov an influential figure in your life? And if so, why?
it's a blueprint. It's again, if you take this as a university curriculum, everything he talked about, I've tried to find out about and find out and see its development. One thing I've lived long enough, it's kind of like in social engineering. All that subject dropped off out of the universe back in the 80s. It was very popular to them. Psychology, engineering, politics. The CIA ran psychological experiments in our colleges. They still do. I was in one of those experiments, and I only found out later, like 30 years later, that who was behind it, and my teacher, and he was involvement, and I found some information. They put 5 of us into like literally a closet, and what I didn't know is there was one guy in there that was the antagonist, and his job was to see if he could get everybody mad. And it's like, all you got to do is start saying stupid stuff, and pretty soon the emotion comes out. And that was a study they were doing. What does it take to get people emotionally angry? Because now you can control them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So these are all control mechanisms. But I have used it as kind of a university to study nuclear physics, to study nucleonics, to study space travel, to study, I mean, every subject in here is worthy of somebody paying attention to. Okay.
Before reading the book, I had looked it up and found out that the first Foundation book was written in 1942, like you said, around the same time Anne Frank was writing her diary. Isn't it astounding how different parts of the world can be, much less planets?
Yes, I have a theory. um, I collected coins when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, fascinated by it. And it was profitable. And in the course of collecting coins, of course, here we go. Well, there were other people doing that in my hometown. And then I thought about, well, what if there's areas that were skipped over? So what if there was like people running on a different timeline?
Mm-hmm.
What if there were people that were like more advanced and less advanced? So I went to a small town called Prague, Oklahoma, and went in the bank and ordered me, $20 worth of coins, and I'd go through them. I found all kinds of coins. I made like $50 that day. Remember, I'm 10 years old. And so my theory that I developed then was that some things get skipped over,
Uh-huh.
right? And so progress is not homogeneous.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I look at it. And so that's what we find in society today. If you look at society in India or China, Africa, and you look at how people live and you go, there's no reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual reason is, yeah, there is, because the money that would have been available and the consciousness that would have developed programs to help that and allow people, humanity, to have, what do you say, a more equitable
Mm-hmm.
existence is being spent on war. And the return is ridiculous. There's no return on the amount of money spent on war.
Mm-hmm.
There's no gold at the end of it. It's what we said earlier.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So,
Are there any other insights you would like to share with us Asimov fans?
oh yeah, I'm not the only one following the blueprint. Right? Elon Musk, right? When they did an interview with him, they said, "How did you come up with all this? Electric cars, spaceships, right?" And he said, very simple, I read the Foundation series, right?
Wow.
And I mean, he admits that that is a sole source. Remember, it's a blueprint,
Yeah.
right? And if you follow that blueprint, you can find somewhere where you go, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to express myself in this way. And I'm going to express it by developing these ideas,
Mm-hmm.
right? Mine was always nucleonics. And of course, they probably don't want you playing with radioactive materials to this day. Uh, there's a lot of potential there, but
Mm-hmm.
and like Elon looked at all of it, and like I said, it provides unlimited imagination. And so if you look at, for instance, NASA, their imagination seems to have shrunk over the years. And he comes in and goes, well, I have unlimited imagination. So I'm going to do this and this and this that
Yeah.
previously hadn't been done. And so I think that's available to everybody. I think that with the idea of freeing up your imagination, and of course, like what this series is about, using fiction, because fiction you can express yourself and not be subject to all the appointed authority to say nay to anything you want to get up to, right? So that's my idea.
Well, Randy, thank you for coming again. This is Gravity University. Our next book is going to be Autobiography of a Yogi, so please submit your questions before the end of next week. Thank you.